Katana Zero is a 2D action platformer made mostly by Justin Stander. It's got a beautiful art style, some amazing music, really creative storytelling, and overall it's just oozing with polish. Ever since I first played it, which was a little over a year ago, it became one of my favourite games of all time, and I keep coming back to it. It is a little bit short, it's around 4 or 5 hours for the first playthrough, and I think the playthrough I did for this video was about half that, but it has some of the best entertainment per hour of any game I've played, and it also has amazing pacing. I can't really complain about the game being short, because it's so tightly paced that I think if you extended it, it would hurt that to some degree. And it's one of the most cohesive games I've ever played. The graphics, the gameplay, the art, the story, the music, they all fit together so well. If you changed a single piece, it would break the whole thing because they're all built around each other, and it's just done so fantastically. So let's start by talking about the story. From the moment you start playing the game, you're given just the right amount of details about the story to make you interested without there being like a huge exposition dump or anything. The story is really tightly written, it explores some really interesting themes, it's got some good amount of emotional depth and some great moments, but it manages to do so without taking over everything else. It's a really thought-provoking game, there's a lot to analyse, there's a lot of crazy Reddit theories about things, but even though it's abstract, despite a lot of abstract games being really hard to understand, the game is coherent on the first playthrough. By the end of the game, you'll have a good idea of what's gone on, you don't have to super analyse everything if you don't want to. A lot of the story is told through gameplay in some ways that are really innovative. It creates a really fluid experience because everything in the gameplay is justified by the story, even things like restarting levels, and it does some crazy innovative things that I've not seen many games do before. And even the dialogue in this game is kept interesting. It's got super stylised text with all these screen effects, and when you are picking dialogue choices, which isn't too often, it has this time-based system, which is quite different to other games, and it keeps you focused and keeps you in the moment. It doesn't feel like it ever really takes any breaks or pulls any punches. The gameplay is really fast-paced and satisfying. There's a lot of skill to it. There's things like reflecting bullets, a lot of tight situations you can get yourself in, where you really need a lot of skill to get out of them. But there's also this slow time mechanic that you can use to get yourself out of these situations, which helps. Although I will say the slow time mechanic is a little bit underutilised, because as you play the game more, and you get more used to reflecting bullets without it, and just playing the game without it, it does feel a little bit tacked on. It's important for the story, but it's not so mandatory for actually playing the game. But it's still really tight, really satisfying, and the best levels in the game feel like open-ended puzzles. You can approach them in any way, you can really play with your own playstyle, and you can use the slow time as much as you want. From the beginning of the game, it gets straight into the action and it just keeps ramping things up. So it always is getting slightly more difficult, slightly more complicated, but never to have like a huge jump or anything, and never really stagnates. It doesn't stray too much from the core gameplay, but there are a few sections where it does, and they're not too gimmicky, they work well, and they don't hang around for too long to get tiring. And it has some boss fights which are really well done. There's even a secret one, and they're all really difficult, but not too challenging that they're frustrating, just challenging enough, and they also are built around the core mechanics of the game, so they don't feel like they're using completely different skills. Now let's talk about the visuals. This game uses a pixel art style, which is a little bit overdone, but the game manages to pull it off and look super distinctive and super stylised. It's really stylised, like I said, but it's still clear what's going on. It doesn't have like crazy filters that make it really hard to see what's going on, but the art style works so well, it's really well pulled off. In motion, it looks super flashy, everything's really overemphasised and really stylish, but it doesn't just use fluid movement to cover up bad art. The art is fantastic. It even has some really good still shots where you can tell that they believe in the power of their art, and it's some amazing still images. I've got some of them as my desktop backgrounds just because they're so good. And the art style, it fits really well with everything else. It really ties the music with the gameplay, with the story. It does also have this VHS aesthetic, which works pretty well, although it's not completely dominant and it isn't used too much, only in certain places. Music is very subjective, of course, but in my opinion, this is one of the best soundtracks to any game ever. I'm constantly listening to tracks from it, and I've got loads of the tracks on different playlists, and it works so well with the atmosphere of the game. It really accentuates some of the emotional moments of the game, while also having some really tense pounding tracks that just increase the intensity of some of the gameplay. The music, I think, is amazing. Obviously, it's very subjective, so you might not like the soundtrack, but in my opinion, it's one of the best. So while I do love Katana Zero, there are some valid criticisms and reasons why I could see you might not want to play the game. Firstly, although I think the game is a complete game, and the story gives you all of the answers you need to work everything out, It does end with to be continued, so there is going to be a sequel or something else in the future, and if you want to wait till there's a complete story here and there's nothing more to be added, I understand. There is a sequel or something coming out. It does blatantly end with the words to be continued. There's also some dark themes. If you're sensitive to media that portrays PTSD, addiction, or excessive violence, you probably want to avoid this game because it doesn't shy away from those issues. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the game is short. I don't see this as a flaw. I think it actually works well with the game, but if you don't have much money to spend on games and you really want to maximise the playtime you get out of the money you do spend, you might want to wait for a Steam sale. Alternatively, the game is on Game Pass, so if you have Game Pass, there's really no excuse not to play this game. And finally, the slow time mechanic, if it's the main thing that draws you to the game, it's cool, it's integral to the story, and you can use it when you want, but it does feel optional, and in my latest playthrough, I didn't really use it much. So, in summary, Katana Zero is one of my favourite games ever. It's a real gem. You shouldn't let yourself miss out on it, especially if you've got Game Pass and you can just play it. If you like this video, subscribe for more similar content, and remember to leave a like and a comment. I will see you all next time.